Jake Morin had ridden across many lonely places in his life, but that late summer afternoon felt different. The sun was soft but warm enough to make him feel the weight of every mile he had crossed. His horse, Dusty, moved slowly down a narrow path lined with tall grass and scattered wildflowers. The sky above was wide and open, painted with long stretches of pale blue that almost made him forget he hadn't eaten a full meal since the night before. Jake was not a man who complained. He had lived most of his years traveling from ranch to ranch, helping with cattle, mending fences, and doing whatever work he could find. But even a man used to hard living needed water, and the small canteen tied to his saddle had only a few warm drops left. He swished it once, listened to the faint sound, and sighed. His lips were dry, and the dust in the air made his throat scratchy. He needed a creek, a pond, or even a puddle, anything to give him and his horse a bit of relief. So when he heard the faint, peaceful sound of running water somewhere ahead, he straightened in the saddle. It was a hopeful sound, like music drifting through quiet land. Dusty lifted his head, too, ears turning toward the noise. Jake patted the horse's neck softly. "Easy now," he murmured. "We're close. Just a little further." He guided Dusty down the slope where the grass thinned out and the earth turned softer under the hooves. He didn't know exactly where he was. He had been riding without a fixed plan for days, letting the land carry him in whatever direction felt right. Jake had spent enough years in the West to know when he had entered lands where he should ride with care. The signs were small but clear. Fresh footprints in the soil, handmade tools left near trees, paths that weren't formed by cattle or ranchers. He knew he was riding through Apache territory. Jake was not afraid, but he was careful. He respected the land and the people who lived there. He had crossed paths with many groups over the years, and he had learned that kindness usually brought kindness in return. Still, he kept his eyes open and his mind steady. He didn't want to startle anyone or stumble into a place he had no right to be. The sound of water grew louder as he moved between tall cottonwood trees that leaned toward each other like old friends. Their leaves shimmered in the sunlight, creating little patterns of light and shadow on the ground. Jake breathed deeply, taking in the cool smell of fresh water. After so many miles of dry air, it felt almost like a gift. He slowed Dusty to a gentle walk. The creek had to be close now, maybe just beyond the next curve in the trees. But as he listened more closely, he realized there was another sound too. Soft voices, light and calm, carried by the breeze. He couldn't make out the words, but he knew immediately they weren't the loud calls of birds or the chatter of animals. These were human voices. Jake paused. He didn't want to surprise anyone. He looked around, searching the trees and the path for any sign of who might be nearby. The voices sounded peaceful, not alarmed, so he felt no reason to turn around and leave. He was simply a tired traveler searching for water, but he also knew that approaching uninvited required care and respect. He swung his leg over the saddle and stepped down quietly, holding Dusty's reins. He whispered to the horse again, calming him so he wouldn't make sudden noises. Then he walked forward slowly, leaving Dusty tied to a branch where he could graze on some grass. Jake moved step by step, pushing aside low branches. He wanted to see who was at the creek without causing worry. The ground sloped gently downward until he was on a small rise looking over the edge of the water. The creek sparkled in the afternoon sun, its surface rippling around smooth stones. And there, at the water's edge, were 3 Apache women. They were standing in the shallow part of the creek, washing clothes and filling small clay pots with clean water. Their hair shone in the sunlight, long and dark, moving gently each time the breeze brushed past. The women worked with soft, steady motions, speaking to each other in calm voices that matched the easy rhythm of the water. Jake froze, not out of fear, but out of respect. He did not want to startle them or appear rude. His first instinct was to back away quietly and wait at a distance, but a twig under his boot cracked gently, making a small sound. One of the women turned her head. Her eyes landed on Jake immediately. There was no scream, no rush to hide, no sign of alarm. Instead, she looked at him with steady, thoughtful eyes, as if trying to learn who he was through a single glance. The other two women noticed him next. They paused their work, but like the first woman, they didn't show fear. Jake quickly lifted both hands to show he meant no trouble. He kept his eyes low, not wanting to seem intrusive. His heart beat faster. Not because he felt danger, but because he didn't know how they would interpret his presence. "I'm sorry," he said gently, his voice low. "Didn't mean to bother you. I just needed some water." His words floated over the creek, carried by the same breeze that moved the leaves. The women exchanged a few quiet words with each other. One of them, the one who had first noticed him, took a small step forward. She was calm, and there was a quiet confidence in her posture. Jake still kept his hands raised slightly, wanting to show absolute respect. The woman raised her hand too, not in warning, but in a simple gesture telling him it was all right. Her expression wasn't unkind. It was cautious, thoughtful, but not closed. She then pointed gently toward another part of the creek, a little farther from where they were standing. Jake understood immediately. She was letting him drink, but at a respectful distance. Jake nodded gratefully and stepped back a bit, moving slowly so he wouldn't seem rushed or careless. He walked to the spot she indicated, just a few steps away, still close enough to hear the gentle sound of the women speaking among themselves. He knelt at the water's edge and dipped his canteen into the cool stream. The water felt refreshing against his fingers. He took a careful sip and closed his eyes for a moment, grateful for the relief. He didn't turn to stare at them. He kept his attention on the water and on Dusty in the distance, but he could feel their presence behind him, calm but watchful. They didn't seem afraid of him, only curious and cautious. Jake wondered what they must think of him. Dusty clothes, sunburned skin, a tired horse, and a face lined by too many days on the trail. He hoped they understood that he was simply passing through, not here to cause trouble. He respected people who lived close to the land, and he always tried to move through their space with understanding. After filling his canteen, he took another slow sip, letting the cool liquid ease his dry throat. The women continued their work, their quiet conversations blending with the sound of water flowing over stones. Jake listened to their voices without trying to understand the words. He found comfort in the simple harmony between their soft tones and the peaceful creek. Standing up again, Jake stepped back from the water. He didn't want to overstay his welcome. He turned slightly toward the women, not too directly, and offered a small, polite nod. The woman who had signaled to him earlier met his eyes briefly. Her expression was still calm, almost gentle, as if she sensed he meant well. Jake walked back to Dusty, moving with quiet steps. The land felt peaceful around him, far more peaceful than many places he had known. He loosened the horse's reins and stroked his mane. The encounter had been unexpected, but not unpleasant. Jake felt a quiet sense of gratitude, not just for the water, but for the calm, respectful way the women had responded to him. It was rare for strangers to meet so peacefully, especially in places where fear and misunderstandings were common. But today had been different, and Jake felt the meaning of that deeply. As he prepared to continue his journey, he took one last look at the creek from a respectful distance. The women had returned to their work, the afternoon sun shining warmly over the water. The moment was simple, quiet, and gentle, but for Jake, it was one he would remember for a long time. Jake walked back toward the creek the next morning, but this time he approached with more understanding of the place. The memory of the 3 Apache women and their calm eyes stayed with him through the night. He had camped only a short distance away, close enough to hear the soft sound of water, but far enough to give them peace. He wasn't planning to return to bother them, but he hoped to pass by quietly, refill his water again, and continue his journey. As he rode slowly, Dusty's hooves pressing lightly into the soft ground, he felt a mix of curiosity and respect. He had been alone for so long that even a short, peaceful encounter with strangers felt meaningful. He didn't expect anything more to come from it. He only wished to move with care, just as he had learned to do in all places that were not his own. The morning sun rose gently behind the cottonwood trees, painting everything in warm gold. Jake breathed deeply, enjoying the coolness that still clung to the air before the heat of the day settled in. Birdsong floated across the forest, and a thin mist hovered above the water ahead. The world felt quiet and steady, like nature itself was beginning the day at a calm pace. As he neared the creek, he slowed Dusty to a stop behind a large rock and listened. The same soft voices he had heard the day before drifted through the air again. They were relaxed, almost musical, carrying a peaceful tone that made Jake smile slightly without meaning to. He didn't want to surprise them again. So he tied Dusty at the same place as before and stepped forward quietly through the trees. He moved with careful steps, making sure each footfall was soft. But even with all his care, one dry leaf crackled under his boot. This time, the women noticed him sooner. They turned toward him with the same steady expressions as the day before. Not startled, not upset, just quietly observant. Their eyes followed him with the calm understanding of people who had seen many travelers pass through their lands. The woman who had signaled to him yesterday lifted her hand in a small gesture of acknowledgement, not a warning, but a simple greeting. Jake lowered his head politely and kept a respectable distance. He did not step near them. He only walked toward the part of the creek they had allowed him to use. He knelt and dipped his hands gently into the cool water. The moment felt familiar, almost like a small thread of trust had been woven between them. As he filled his canteen, he could sense their presence behind him. They were not afraid of him. Instead, they seemed aware of him the way they would be aware of a passing deer or a traveler on the road. Something to watch carefully, but without fear. Their calm nature impressed him again. He slowly turned his head just enough to speak without facing them directly. "Good morning," he said softly, careful not to disturb their peace. "I'll be on my way soon." For a brief moment, there was silence. Then one of the women, slightly younger than the others, with bright, thoughtful eyes, said something in her own language. Jake didn't understand the words, but her tone was gentle. She motioned toward a fallen log a short distance away, as if inviting him to sit. Her gesture wasn't strong or demanding. It was simple, friendly, offered with quiet confidence. Jake hesitated. He didn't want to intrude, but the woman nodded again, kindly but firmly, and Jake felt it would be rude not to accept. So he stepped a bit away from the water and sat lightly on the fallen log, leaving space between them. He still kept his posture respectful, careful not to look at them in a way that could seem impolite. For a few minutes, the women continued their work as if his presence were nothing unusual. They washed small bundles of clothing in the shallow water, rinsing fabric with long, practiced motions. Their hands moved with an easy rhythm, almost like part of the creek's flow. Sometimes they spoke among themselves. Sometimes they worked in peaceful silence. Jake watched the sunlight dance on the water, feeling strangely comforted by the simple scene. He was used to the loud noises of cattle drives, long shouts across ranch fields, and harsh winds carrying sand across open plains. This place was the opposite, quiet, gentle, steady. It made him feel grounded in a way he hadn't felt in months. He looked down at his boots and dust-covered clothes, realizing how worn he must seem compared to the neat patience of the women's work. He cleared his throat softly. "Thank you," he said in a low voice, "for letting me rest here." The older woman, the one with the wise, steady eyes, glanced at him briefly. She spoke a word he didn't know, but her tone carried warmth. Then she pointed to his horse grazing in the distance and smiled faintly, as if noticing how tired the animal looked. Jake smiled back shyly. "Long road behind us," he said. "Still more ahead." She nodded in understanding, then returned to her washing. After a while, the women finished their chores and lifted their small clay pots, filled now with clean water. They moved with smooth balance, carrying the weight carefully so the water wouldn't spill. Jake stood up from the log, expecting them to leave. But before they did, the youngest woman paused and looked at him with curious eyes. She pointed gently toward the forest path he had traveled from, then made a small gesture as if asking if he was going further. "Yes," Jake replied, keeping his tone soft. "I'm heading west, just passing through." She nodded and seemed to think for a moment. Then she walked over to a small woven basket resting on a rock. She reached inside and pulled out a small wrapped bundle. She walked toward Jake slowly, her steps calm but sure. He stayed still, careful not to move too suddenly. When she was close enough, she extended the bundle toward him. Jake felt a bit surprised and touched by the gesture. He took it gently in both hands, unfolding the simple cloth. Inside were dried berries, dark, rich, and sweet-smelling. "For me?" he asked softly. The woman nodded, her expression warm but shy. Jake felt a grateful warmth spread across his chest. "Thank you," he said with heartfelt sincerity. He took one berry and tasted it. It was sweet and refreshing, and it immediately gave him a small burst of energy. He smiled gratefully. The woman smiled back, just a small, soft curve of her lips, but enough to brighten the quiet morning. The other two women joined her, and together they lifted their water pots and prepared to walk away from the creek. Jake stepped aside respectfully to give them space. As they walked past him, the older woman paused for a brief moment. She placed her hand gently over her heart, a simple, graceful gesture of goodwill, then turned and followed the others through the trees. Their footsteps made almost no sound as they moved along the forest path. Jake stood there for a long moment after they disappeared from view. The light breeze carried the soft scent of the water and the faint echoes of their gentle voices. He looked down at the small bundle of berries in his hand and felt truly humbled. They had no reason to offer him anything, no reason to trust a lone cowboy wandering close to their camp. Yet they had treated him with calm respect, respect he knew he had to return 10 times over. He sat again on the log, eating the berries slowly, savoring each one. Dusty lifted his head and nickered softly in the distance, as if sensing the peaceful shift in Jake's mood. Jake looked around the quiet creek, feeling gratitude settle in his heart like a warm ember. He wasn't used to this kind of gentle kindness. Most of his life had been simple, rough, and lonely. But here, in this shaded corner of Apache land, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Welcome, even if only for a moment. He refilled his canteen, splashed cool water on his face, and let the gentle flow ease his tired mind. Then he stood up, tied the berry cloth securely to his saddlebag, and prepared to continue his journey. Before leaving, he turned back one last time to look at the creek. The sunlight shimmered on the surface, and the memory of the 3 women brought a quiet smile to his face. Jake knew he would not forget this place, not because of the water or the shade, but because of the unexpected kindness that had touched his wandering life. And as he guided Dusty back onto the forest trail, the peaceful morning stayed with him, warming his thoughts like the rising sun. Jake left the quiet creek behind, thinking his short moment of peace with the 3 Apache women would remain a gentle memory, something rare and beautiful that would stay in his mind for many miles. But life has a way of surprising people. And before the day ended, Jake found himself returning to that same clearing, not by choice, but by the quiet pull of unexpected events. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, turning the air warm and bright. Jake rode Dusty along a narrow trail marked with soft earth and scattered pine needles. His thoughts drifted to the creek again, the kind greetings, the simple food, the calm expressions of the women. It felt almost unreal, like something out of a dream. A cowboy like him rarely found such kindness on the open trail. He kept replaying the moment when the youngest woman handed him the small bundle of berries. The memory gave him a sense of comfort he couldn't explain. Hours passed quietly. The forest around him grew thicker, and small signs appeared along the edges of the trail. Footprints, woven grass markers, and the remains of small campfires, now cooled and neat. Jake recognized these signs immediately. They told him he was still moving through Apache territory. He didn't feel worried, but he stayed alert. He didn't want to wander into any place where people might misunderstand his presence. Respect was the best compass a traveler could carry in land that was not his own. As the afternoon light softened, a sound reached him through the trees. It wasn't harsh or alarming, just a steady rhythmic sound like someone walking with calm purpose. Jake paused Dusty and listened carefully. The footsteps moved in his direction, but were still far away. He waited, not wanting to make any sudden movements. A moment later, a tall Apache man stepped into view on the trail ahead. He had steady eyes, long dark hair tied with simple leather, and a calm but serious expression. His posture showed strength, but not aggression. He looked like someone who understood the land deeply and moved with purpose. Jake understood immediately. This was someone connected to the women he had met. The man paused a short distance away, studying Jake with observant, thoughtful eyes. There was no anger in his expression, only careful interest and a natural protectiveness. Jake placed his hand gently on Dusty's neck and kept still. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't shift in his saddle. He simply nodded respectfully. "Good afternoon," Jake said in a soft, steady voice. The man didn't speak at first. Instead, he walked a little closer, stopping at a safe but comfortable distance. He studied Jake the way someone might study the wind, quietly, patiently, without haste. Then he pointed toward Jake's saddlebag, the bag where the small cloth of berries rested. Jake understood the gesture. He slowly reached into the bag, pulled out the wrapped bundle, and held it up with care so the man could see it clearly. "She gave these to me," Jake said, referring to the younger woman. "I didn't take anything that wasn't offered." The Apache man looked at the bundle, then at Jake's face. His expression softened slightly. He seemed to recognize the truth in Jake's tone. He stepped closer and lifted his hand in a simple greeting. Jake breathed easier and nodded. The man spoke his name in English, slow but clear. "Keeley," he said, tapping his chest gently. Jake smiled politely. "Jake." The introductions were simple, but they felt meaningful. Cale motioned for Jake to follow him back toward the creek. His movements were calm and confident, not demanding, more like an invitation than a command. Jake guided Dusty behind him and followed Cale through the trees. The path was familiar enough that Jake realized they were returning to the place where he had met the women. He wondered why Cale was bringing him back. Was there something they needed? Something he had misunderstood? As they reached the trees near the water, Jake saw the women again. They were sitting on a small rock ledge, sorting herbs into small bundles and placing them carefully into woven bags. When they noticed Cale returning with Jake, they looked up with interest but without alarm. The youngest woman smiled softly, the same warm smile she had given when offering the berries. Jake felt a calm warmth settle over him again. Cale joined the women and spoke a few quiet words in their language. The women listened, then nodded. One of them motioned politely for Jake to sit on a flat stone across from them. The gesture was kind and welcoming, and Jake accepted. He sat down slowly, placing his hat beside him. Dusty stayed tied nearby, grazing peacefully. The air felt warm and rich with the scent of herbs and fresh water. Kayla sat across from Jake. His posture was straight but relaxed. The women continued sorting herbs but listened carefully to the conversation taking shape. Kayla spoke slowly in English, as if choosing each word with care. "My sisters say you came to the water with respect." Jake nodded. "I tried to. I don't want to step where I shouldn't. I only needed water." Kayla nodded back, understanding. He looked at Jake for a moment, then pointed toward the open land beyond the trees. "Many travelers pass through. Some move fast, some move loud. Some do not notice who lives here." Jake lowered his eyes respectfully. "I understand." Cale studied him again. "But you stopped. You kept distance. You spoke gently. They saw this." Jake felt a small sense of relief. "I'm glad they did." For a moment, the group fell into quiet. The women continued tying small bundles of herbs. Jake watched their delicate, practiced hands. Everything they did seemed thoughtful and balanced, like each motion held meaning. Cale reached for one of the herb bundles and handed it to Jake. The scent was earthy and calming. "For your road," Cale said. "It helps in long travel. Good for tired mind." Jake accepted it with both hands. "Thank you." The women exchanged small smiles. Little by little, the quiet conversation grew easier. Kayla shared simple details about the forest, how far the river ran, which paths were safe, which areas had wildflowers in bloom. He spoke without revealing anything private or sacred, only things a traveler might need to stay safe and respectful. Jake listened gladly. He had spent so many years on the road that kindness like this was rare. He appreciated every word. At one point, the youngest woman pointed toward Dusty and said something softly, smiling. Jake didn't understand her language, but her expression made the meaning clear. "She likes your horse," Kaylee translated. "Says he looks gentle." Jake laughed softly. "He's a good friend. Been with me a long time." The youngest woman nodded, her eyes warm and thoughtful. She seemed fascinated by Dusty's calm posture and soft brown coat. As the afternoon continued, the conversation shifted to simple stories. Jake shared a little about where he had traveled, how he had worked on ranches, how he never stayed in one place for too long. He spoke carefully, never mentioning anything harsh or painful. He kept his words light and respectful. The women listened with interest, sometimes asking Kaylee to translate a question. Their curiosity was gentle and kind. They seemed to enjoy hearing about faraway places and wandering trails. In return, Kaylee shared a small story about the river, how it flowed gently in summer but grew lively in spring. He spoke of the tall cottonwoods that had been standing longer than any person alive, and how the birds returned every morning to fill the forest with their songs. Jake listened like a child hearing a bedtime tale, calm, peaceful, fully present. As the sun began to dip lower, the light turned golden and soft. The forest looked almost magical, the shadows long and beautiful. The women finished tying their last bundles of herbs. They placed them neatly into a large woven basket. Kaylee stood first, then offered Jake a friendly nod. The youngest woman stepped forward, handed Jake a second small bundle, this one filled with dried leaves that smelled faintly sweet, and smiled gently. "For you," she said in simple English. Jake's heart warmed. "Thank you, truly." The three women began walking toward their camp, their steps quiet and light. Cale lingered a moment longer. He met Jake's eyes with steady calm. "You are welcome to pass through. You gave no trouble." Jake nodded gratefully. "I'm honored. Thank you." Cale placed his hand gently over his heart, a gesture Jake recognized now as a sign of peaceful respect. then turned and walked after his sisters. Jake stood alone by the creek, holding the herb bundles, listening to the soft wind moving through the leaves. He felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of belonging, even if only for a moment. He tied the herbs carefully to his saddle and took one last look toward the path the family had taken. The forest seemed brighter now, as if shaped by their kindness. Jake knew his life on the trail would continue, but he also knew this day, this quiet meeting, this exchange of trust, would stay with him forever. Jake slept lightly that night, resting under a sky filled with stars so bright they looked almost close enough to touch. The forest around him was quiet, except for the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle sound of the nearby creek. Dusty stood close by, his breathing slow and steady. Jake felt a sense of peace that had been missing from his life for years. He kept thinking of the Apache family, Cowboy and his 3 sisters. Their calm kindness had settled deep in his heart. He had never expected to feel so welcome in a land that wasn't his own. Simple gestures, soft smiles, shared herbs, gentle conversations. These small things carried more meaning than he could explain. Before dawn, Jake sat up and stretched, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. A faint blue glow filled the sky as morning approached. Today he planned to continue his journey west, but he felt a gentle hesitation inside him. Part of him wanted to stay near the peaceful creek a little longer, but he knew he couldn't. He had never stayed anywhere for too long. His life was built on moving from place to place, always searching for the next job, the next quiet corner, the next sunrise. He packed his few belongings, his hat, his worn blanket, the herb bundles from the family, and the last of the berries. As he tightened his saddle, he found himself turning his head toward the forest path, half hoping to see one of the women or Keeley walking through the trees, but the forest remained still, wrapped in early morning peace. Jake smiled softly to himself. He didn't need a farewell. Their kindness was enough. Dusty nickered gently when Jake climbed into the saddle. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured. "Just a little more traveling." He guided the horse toward the creek, wanting to refill his canteen one more time before leaving. When he reached the water, he stopped for a moment, letting the calm beauty of the place sink into his memory. The trees leaned over the creek like protectors, their leaves shimmering in the soft light. The water sparkled, just as it had every morning, running clean and clear over smooth stones. Jake knelt and filled his canteen slowly, taking his time. He cupped his hands and splashed cool water on his face, waking himself fully. When he stood, he noticed something on a rock nearby, a small woven pouch neatly tied with thin twine. His heart warmed instantly. Someone had left it for him. Jake stepped closer and picked it up gently. Inside the pouch were dried herbs, a few berries, and a small carved wooden bead shaped like a simple leaf. The bead was smooth and lightly polished, clearly handmade with care. A soft feeling of gratitude filled him. He didn't know which of them had left it, Kayleigh or one of the women, but he understood the meaning. It was a blessing for his journey, a sign of goodwill, a quiet way of saying he was remembered. He placed the pouch into his saddlebag right beside the other gifts. Then he looked at the creek one last time. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty air. Even though no one stood there, Jake felt the land itself accepting his words. He turned Dusty toward the west and rode slowly, letting the forest open ahead of him. The trees grew thinner as he traveled, and sunlight spread across the landscape like a warm blanket. He followed the faint trail until it led out of the wooded area and into a wide meadow filled with tall grass glowing golden in the early sun. Jake rode without hurry. His mind wandered back to the peaceful faces of the Apache sisters, the gentle smiles, the careful gestures, the soft tones of their voices. He remembered how the youngest one had smiled at Dusty and how the oldest woman had placed her hand gently over her heart in that quiet gesture of respect. These memories warmed him the way a fire warms cold hands. They filled the emptiness that often followed him on the road. As the morning grew brighter, Jake saw a shape moving along the edge of the meadow. A single person walking with steady steps. Dusty flicked his ears forward, sensing the presence before Jake fully noticed. Jake slowed the horse and looked closely. It was Cale. He walked calmly, carrying a woven basket in one hand and a long walking stick in the other. His expression was relaxed, not tense or troubled. Jake guided Dusty toward him at a gentle pace. Cale stopped and waited as Jake approached. The man's calm expression held a hint of warmth, something Jake hadn't expected to see again before leaving. Jake lifted his hand in greeting. "Didn't think I'd see you again this morning." Cale nodded. "I walk this way sometimes," he said simply. Then his eyes moved to the saddlebag. "You found the gift." Jake smiled. "I did, and I'm grateful." Cale's face softened slightly. "My sisters say you travel with a quiet heart. They wanted to give something for your road." Jake nodded with deep appreciation. "That means more than they know." For a moment, the two men stood quietly, the breeze brushing past them gently. Jake felt he should say more. There was so much gratitude inside him that words hardly seemed enough. "You and your family showed me kindness," Jake said softly. "I won't forget it." Cale met his eyes. "You gave respect first," he replied. "Kindness follows respect." Jake felt the truth of those words settle inside him, like a stone placed gently in calm water. Cale lifted the basket he carried and set it on the ground. Inside were small pieces of bread made from ground corn wrapped neatly in cloth. He offered some to Jake with a simple gesture. "For the day," Cale said. "It will help." Jake accepted it with both hands. "Thank you." Cale then looked at the horizon, where the meadow stretched endlessly toward distant hills. "Your road continues," he said quietly. "Walk it with care." Jake nodded. "I will." Cale placed a hand briefly over his heart, the familiar gesture of goodwill, and Jake returned it with sincerity. Then Cale stepped back, turning toward the forest. He walked with the same calm steps he always carried, soon disappearing into the trees, becoming one with the land he knew so well. Jake watched him go, feeling a mix of gratitude and gentle sadness. Encounters like this were rare. People seldom crossed paths in such a peaceful, meaningful way. He felt honored to have been trusted, even for a short time. Dusty shifted under him, ready to move on. Jake smiled down at his loyal horse. "Well, partner," he said softly, "time to see what's waiting out there." He guided Dusty forward. The meadow stretched endlessly, green and gold under the bright sun. A soft breeze carried the scent of earth and wildflowers. Birds soared overhead, drifting in wide circles. Jake rode at an easy pace, letting the beauty of the land wash over him. As he traveled, he realized something important, something gentle but powerful. His meeting with the Apache family had changed him. He felt lighter, calmer. The past burdens he carried now felt less heavy. He thought of the simple gifts, the herbs, the berries, the small carved bead, and each one felt like a reminder that kindness could be found in unexpected places. Respect could build bridges even in quiet, unplanned moments. As he crossed the meadow and entered the open land beyond, Jake felt ready for whatever came next. He carried no map and had no fixed destination, but he carried something better, a memory that warmed his heart and guided his spirit. A reminder that even a wanderer could find a moment of belonging. A reminder that strangers could become gentle friends. A reminder that kindness, when shared, left a trail brighter than any old path through the wilderness. Jake lifted his face to the sun and smiled. the world felt wide, beautiful, and full of promise. And somewhere behind him, near a quiet creek shaded by cottonwoods, a family of kind-hearted people continued their day, remembering the cowboy who had passed with respect and left with gratitude. Jake carried their goodwill with him, step by step, as he rode into the open horizon. A man changed by a simple meeting, a quiet moment, and a kindness that would stay with him forever.